rinse, repeat, brush, rinse, repeat.
But there were two girls, and it was like, you'll have to give us a ride. You can't tell us no. You can't refuse us. He'll let us in his car.
The thoughts were all alone in this empty void. You know, the head in the fishbowl.
This doesn't look right. They got close enough where he said he could see, you know, their eyes and how intelligent they seem. This doesn't look right. These gremlin-type creatures. This doesn't look right. No pupils, no iris. 3 fingers. 3 long fingers. And this is when the mental torture.
And then it was eerily quiet.
Hey guys, we're back on Conspirinormal. It's been a couple of weeks. It's just me and Rob chilling here in the Bighorn studio.
Chillaxing.
Well, how's everything going, Luke? Oh wait, he's not here.
He was tired.
Yeah, he's tired.
He's tired.
You know, he works hard. He's a fry cook at a barbecue place downtown, so it takes a lot out of him. How you been, Rob? Even though I've seen you all day, but just for the general audience, tell everybody how you been.
Today I've been good. It was a rough week. I had the flu.
Yeah, you had the plague, man.
It was
what
horrible.
happened.
I was like 4 days of like horrible aches and fever and just. Ugh.
It was like
cool.
like Alyssa got it, and like didn't you girls get it too?
One of them did. Yep.
And one was completely unscathed.
Yep. And we had family in town for the week. It was awesome. It was great timing.
A family in town right when you got sick, man.
None of them caught it though, thankfully. So.
Yeah, I know it. Well, that is good. Well, like I said, it's been 2 weeks, man, and I moved. You helped me move the other day, which
Sick.
was it the second time you helped me move?
No, while I was sick.
That
was the first time.
That was the first day you were. That was the first day you were sick too, right?
Yeah, not cool. I had to bail on you. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's perfectly okay. We did come over here, and I got to show my dad the studio, so that was really neat. And today you smoked some butt for us.
I did. I smoked a big old pork butt.
That was some good butt, man.
Oh man, it was delicious.
I had like 2 servings of butt. There's no double entendre there, is there?
No, and we didn't make any jokes during dinner because we're civilized folks.
Not at all.
None.
Not at all. Well, guys, tonight we have on Jeff. I think his name is pronounced Worcester. I'm going to have to ask him, like, what is your name? How is your name pronounced? Because there's like, I hear Worcester, I hear Worcester, I hear Worcester, I hear all kinds of pronunciations of that name. So I think I'm just going to have to ask you, how do I pronounce your name? You would think that would be an easy name to pronounce, but it really isn't. If you think about it, because you remember, like, I always think about Worcestershire sauce, right?
Right. Yeah, and I've seen his name written. Like I know, I can't help you though.
Yeah. I know. We're just gonna have to ask him. I'm sure it's one of the like 50 different ways that you can pronounce it. Guys, we just did a session about an hour and a half ago with Peter Robbins.
My favorite story ever.
Yes,
ever.
We can tell you a little bit about that story. This is a story about Peter when he was a young man back in the early 70s. A trip that he took first to Europe and then to Greece and then Turkey and all the way into Afghanistan. And we just got to where he went to Afghanistan, into Pakistan, and then about where he was going to go to India. So we're going to have to do a 2-parter on this. But you're not going to hear that on the regular stream. So, Rob, tell everybody where they can hear this incredible story from Peter Robbins.
Well, you can hear this, and this is our 4th episode, isn't it?
It's our 4th.
3 other. There's a back catalog starting to grow at our Patreon community, and that's at patreon.com/Conspirinormal, where you can sign up for various tiers of subscription to help support the show. And we also, we just want to ask people to donate. We wanted to give something back. So this is our way of doing that. And, anyone that wants to give a little extra, we'll give you these bonus episodes. And that one should be up there about the same time as this episode, I think.
Yeah. And it's just a way that, we give you guys something that you can listen to if you want to give us and you like the show, throw a little bit of money our way. We always appreciate cash. So, but there's also donate. We also do donations on the website as well.
Right.
So,
if that's easier than you don't want to hassle with a subscription or something.
Right. And like I pointed out while we were speaking to Peter that we now have 3 patrons, and we appreciate all 3 of those patrons. We really do. But so we're hoping to get at least one more patrons. I think it's a 1-to-1 ratio of shows that are on our Patreon feed to actual Patreons. So we need to start coming up with, I think, other things that we can put on there as well on a more regular basis.
Yeah.
And also, I'd love to we need to do like T-shirts and stuff like that for patrons too. So, but guys, we are going to take a little break here. And we are going to come back. We're going to talk about the deep state tonight and what the deep state is, how it came about, what that term means, first of all. If anybody has been listening to the show, we've talked a lot about this, especially in relation to Trump and his struggles, or whether or not Trump is a part or outside of the deep state. So we've talked about this a lot lately.
It's one of the scariest topics for me.
Yeah.
Like I can handle like paranormal stuff and ghosts and alien abductions and all that. Like, but this just.
Well, yeah, same here. And Jeff is the head of a center called the Center it's called the Center for Deep State Research, or Deep Political Research. So we're going to talk to him about that tonight. And so guys, stay tuned and we'll be right back on Conspirinormal.
What if I were to tell you that the forms are not the facts? And what if I were to ask you the shape of water? Water is in a state of constant flow and flux, a paradox of weakness and strength. My name is Aaron David, and I am host of Charm the Water, a weekly podcast centering on the occult and mysticism, based in Asheville, North Carolina. You can find us at charmthewater.com or iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, your favorite pod feeder. Come holler.
All right, guys, we're back on Conspirinormal, and we have a first-time guest on the show. Someone that I had seen this person's material from both their kind of business page, organization page, and also their personal Facebook page. And we got in touch and asked him to come on the show. And I believe that I will pronounce his name correctly, and that is Jeff Worcester. How'd I do there, Jeff?
That's correct. Yep, you got it. Right on.
Excellent. From now on, I'll just refer to you as Jeff. So that will work. But tonight we're going to talk about the deep state. And, this has been somewhat of a meme lately that we have seen. I had heard about this probably, I want to say about 2 or 3 years ago. The whole idea or the term, the deep state, I think it's associated mostly with Peter Dale Scott, the philosopher, and I think he's an historian. I'm not quite sure, but I've heard that. The first time I ever heard that was about 3 years ago. Well, once Trump was elected, I started hearing it more and more. And actually, the first time that I ever heard it on mainstream media, and it kind of really surprised me when I heard it, actually, the term deep state was on a BBC News from BBC America here in the United States. Where they were interviewing James Woolsey, the former CIA chief, who at the time was on Trump's transition team. And they actually said something to the effect of, the American deep state continues on. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty impressive use of that term. I've never heard that actually used on mainstream media. Now you were kind of hearing that all the time, that term being bandied about, deep state. So I think, Jeff, where I want to go first with this is, where does the term deep state come from? What does this mean exactly?
Well, that's a great question, and it's definitely a good jumping off point. For me, I probably became familiar with the term through Peter Dale Scott, a number of his writings, I understood then that it was a term that came from Turkey, and I forget what the translation is, but basically in Turkey it's termed as basically a situation where the military colludes with drug traffickers and hitmen, and to specifically wage a dirty war against the Kurdish insurgents. So it was kind of specific to the 1990s, and I think Peter Dale Scott, kind of took it and expanded on it. If you read a couple of his different books, I think in one book he defines it as a closed network said to be more powerful than the public state, and that it engages in false flag violence. It's organized by the military and intelligence apparatus and involves their links to organized crime. And to me, that's the one that I'm going with. I think that what he built and what his identifier for what the deep state is, I think that's the accurate one. I think that later attempts have been made by some authors to maybe decriminalize the term a little bit. A guy named Mike Lofgren wrote a book called The Deep State. This was many years after Peter Dale Scott had written about the subject, and this was in 2016. This guy is coming from a political background, much like I have, but I'm coming from working with the Democrats and kind of battling my own working, from within that side, and he's coming from the Republicans. Well, he writes about it, and he kind of dumbs it down. I like to say it's a watered down version. He defines it as, it's a web of entrenched interests, but basically links it to more of a financial thing, less kind of conspiratorial. Like, yeah, obviously there's structures that stay in place, beyond the, that supersede presidencies and things like that. Yeah, there's collusion. It's not real good, but it's not necessarily criminal. He really downplays it, and that to me is kind of put us in a very difficult position, because we've got what the term should mean, and I think that they're trying to delegitimize it a little bit. It's kind of like how in the during the Warren Commission, they really kind of sought to label any skeptics as conspiracy theorists, and there's documentation to that effect, that that the critique of this will be in the form of conspiracy theories. Therefore, anybody who criticizes is going to be a conspiracy theorist. So they really gave birth to that, and you kind of feel like that's starting to happen now with a legitimate identifier that is the deep state. And this guy Lofgren tried to kind of water it down a little bit, and in the wake of Trump's presidency, I think what they've done is quite worse. I think that they've taken it, and the few elements that will talk about it, it's usually in an effort to kind of mock it, and it's really done so in an attempt to kind of tie it to the alt-right movement, if you will.
Right.
And so it's, they tie it. Well, this is a catchphrase of Bannon. And again, I'm speaking to me, when I look into this stuff, there's constant battles for me with my, I always say I'm a Democrat, but I'm an American first, and I find lots of fault within my own party. I'm not necessarily well liked within my own party, even though I do a good job, in what I do, because I do this kind of research, and it kind of supersedes all that. So, but the attempts that are really kind of, again, I'm not a big fan of Steve Bannon, for instance, but to tie this term, to Breitbart, to Steve Bannon, and make it a Trump thing,
Sure.
Is done to, really, to me, I look and I see the parallels between that and the label of conspiracy theorist. So, I think that's definitely dangerous. It's, that goes along with the whole fake news thing that they're trying to kind of want.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you, as a Democrat, I mean, from your fellow Democrats, are you getting flack from studying this kind of material and talking about some like a concept like the deep state? I mean, has that hurt you in any way, far as like, having the contacts in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, it's definitely a good question. Truth is, it's cost me. It's cost me over the years. I probably only been working in the political sector for about 9 years now. Prior to that, I have kind of an interesting life story, for another time, but it basically didn't start with politics. I didn't go to school for politics. I was, did 10 years in the security industry, always wanted to work in law enforcement. So I always had that kind of investigative mind. And I was also a, pretty good writer, but I ended up kind of wanting to, all the while I was a deep political researcher long before I got into politics. So it was kind of like my eyes were open to some of this stuff, but, in terms of theology, I definitely line up more, with the Democratic Party, certainly on social issues. That said, I differ a lot. I criticize a lot from within, but I figure it's a two-party animal. My research has taught me that. Right. It's unfortunate. I wish that it wasn't that way, but right now you're better off picking a party and battling from within. But I got kind of a unique opportunity, to work in politics about 9 years ago, and I've made it. I've made it a career of sorts, and I knew that going in that was going to be difficult. And I think that I was able to, not necessarily consciously, but I really laid low for the first few years until probably about 2007, 2008. Actually, it was probably a year or two into it when I really started to kind of come out of the conspiratorial closet, if you will, and really try to form an organization similar to the one that I'm forming now, with a little bit of a different spin on it, but ultimately with the purpose of trying to put together an organization, a nonprofit that can really look into not only the JFK assassination, but a lot of other deep state crimes that are, that really fit that kind of MO. And so with that, there were whispers, there were, denials of jobs that I knew I should have been getting, but when you're good at what you do, eventually somebody will hire you. And I'm the kind of guy that when I pick a political candidate to work for, I do a lot of vetting. And for me, it's not about party. I might disagree with that candidate on a number of different issues. I might have a couple key issues and things like that, transparency, things like that are ones that I'm looking for, but other ones I can kind of, I can take or give away a little bit. But so, I've been able to get jobs, I think, because of what I've done, but I've also been cost a lot of jobs that I should have gotten, and it's gotten worse. And then certainly in the past year, since I really kind of went public with Center for Deep Political Research, which is the organization that myself and a couple of big time kind of minds in the JFK research community, Randy Benson, who created the documentary called The Searchers, based on the JFK assassination researchers from the first generation on through and past my generation. And so, he's one. Joe Green, who's done a lot of political conspiracy research on, all the big assassinations. Richard Bartholomew, he's done significant JFK research for many, many years now. We look to kind of put together a think tank, and that's really the long-term goal of our nonprofit is to kind of put it together as a think tank, have a small, but effective investigative staff that can not only get to work and try and solve these crimes. We feel that, and I'm sure we'll get into it later, but we feel that there's a lot of evidence in a lot of these, deep events that's already there. It's just a matter of kind of putting it all together. So kind of put together a process where we're, sharing some of the research that we already have, and kind of putting that out in the mainstream. So it's really built on, research and education, and really kind of countering deep state, disinformation that's going out there, and that obviously includes a lot of what's going on in the mainstream media, being that the mainstream media, unfortunately, is really largely owned by the deep state, or certainly loyal to it. So,
Sure.
but to get back to the question is certainly with this organization, it's definitely going to I'm kind of approaching it like this is a good time. I'm a little burnt out working on political campaigns. This is really where my heart is. So if this kind of puts a nail in the coffin that is my political career, so be it. But it's been tough. But for me, there was never if it's got to be one or the other, I'm never going to sacrifice what I know and my, I've done this kind of research since my mother first took me to see the JFK film in '91. I think I was in sixth grade at the time, and so I've really been looking into it. I was
a freshman in high school when I went to see that. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So it definitely kind of stuck with me after that. And so that was always my first loyalty. And so, that's where it's going to start and end. But it certainly cost me.
Well, let's talk about the origins of the deep state. Let's talk about where this comes from. And also, has it always been around? I mean, but the current system that we have, where do you think the roots of it are?
I think that a good resource I'll lead off with, and I would recommend to anybody who's, whether they've just heard the term for the first time or they've thought of it. A lot of people kind of look at Peter Dale Scott's definitions kind of vary a little bit, and there's a whole glossary I've been actually meaning to shoot you guys that's got a good summary of a number of terms that he uses, deep political type terms, but he differentiates a little bit between the shadow government and the deep state. But for most people, they equate it as one and the same. So a lot of people have heard the term shadow government, and they say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." But whether you're brand new to the term or not, I would recommend David Talbot's "The Devil's Chessboard." That's really the basis for, I think. For somebody who hasn't done this for a long time, I would almost recommend it before any of the the big name JFK books on the subject, because I think it goes way back and focuses not just on the JFK case. It talks about the early days of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which of course was a predecessor to the CIA, and I think that the roots were definitely in there. But I've got the way I look at it is you've got the formation of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1942, and that started to take power by nature, in large capacity away from the presidency. You've got a supposed advisory only body, but you've got it in a place where it can manipulate. If you've got a president who love or hate Trump, he's certainly not someone who's, and we've had people from both parties that were very ill experienced on in terms of national security and with the military. But if you've got the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I mean, for example, the Joint Chiefs of Staff were known to really kind of push President Kennedy around, and this was somebody who had served in the military. So if they have elements that can feel like they can push a president who has military service, imagine what kind of influence they can have over somebody who doesn't, who's a neophyte in that area.
Sure.
But I certainly look at the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Ballpark, I probably put it around the early 40s. I say, around 1942 with the Joint Chiefs of Staff coming into being. Also in 1942, you had the Office of Strategic Services, which was a wartime intelligence agency, and that was formed actually as a component of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And there's a lot of good movies on the subject. The Good Shepherd is one. It's stars Matt Damon. Historically, it's got some problems, and it's not. I would say it's less tied to the historical record than some of the films I've seen.
Yeah, also deals with Skull and Bones as well.
Yeah, that's definitely some interesting points in there. Some are accurate, some I've kind of fact checked, some maybe not so. But it's a good for somebody who's fairly inexperienced to it. I'd recommend seeing that movie and then kind of come in afterwards and read something like the Devil's Chessboard, which is a really difficult book to read. If you're starting out into political research from scratch, but you watch a movie like The Good Shepherd, it gives you an idea about how OSS kind of bled into the CIA, so to speak. And because
it was virtually the same thing if you think about it. I mean, really, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the difference is that the CIA really was supposed to be subject to congressional oversight, and I like the line that the character, who of course is very loosely based on Richard Helms. I think his character in the film is named Richard Hayes, conveniently, and he says at the end of the movie, I think he says a congressman asked me once why, when we talk about CIA, we never put "the" in front of it. And he said, and I responded to him, well, do you put the word "the" in front of God? And even reciting that line kind of sends chills, especially because I can kind of see Richard Helms saying that, whether or not it's just an anecdote or it was really said, it to me that really kind of portrays what their attitude was to oversight. And I think, you needn't only look at Richard Helms' testimony to the House Select Committee on Assassinations or the Church Committee, and you can hear just the condescension in his voice. He doesn't believe that he should be there. He doesn't believe that he should have to be there. And I think that these two agencies, which ended up into one, were a big part. But I think to say that the CIA itself, is part of the deep state, it's not. I would liken it to, to a layperson, I would say it's basically the military, industrial, and intelligence complex.
Yeah.
Eisenhower warned about the military industrial complex, and now it just grew. After that, it really just grew into both. And I think that's really a good way to sum it up. And I think that you can lump any of the intelligence agencies. It just continued to grow and grow with the adding of the Defense Intelligence Agency and all these different components. Obviously, you already had existing military intelligence and things like that. And I think what we're finding out now, though, is that the elements of the deep state don't always play nicely, and so I think that there's a lot of things going on now. And again, we'll probably get into that a little more in depth later. But with the current framework, you talk about the deep state, you talk about Trump. It's not just Trump versus the deep state. There's elements within the deep state who may have been, wanted Trump to get elected. There may have been elements within the deep state that wanted Clinton to get elected because she was definitely the more hawkish of the two.
Yeah. Agreed.
And so there's kind of a whole lot of thoughtful study, that goes into the deep state itself. It's really a growing and evolving term.
Yeah, that's true. It is constantly evolving, as I can tell on the news now, as we keep hearing about it. I think too, the beginning of the Cold War really escalated it as well, and definitely the whole military-industrial complex itself just kept on going because then you kind of had an excuse with the Cold War, right? You had conflicts like Korea, and then you had the big one like Vietnam. And so, we were able to be on this constant war footing. The whole defense intelligence, the whole defense contractors and all these kind of things. And then, of course, the Cold War ends and the war on terror begins. And that we're able to keep going with that because now we got to fight this constant war on terror. Yeah. And now Russia's back in the news. So now we got the old enemy back. So it's just like this whole thing that just keeps on going, Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's definitely, especially because for someone like me, again, though I've delved into a number of the different deep events, as far as drug trafficking, all sorts of different black operations. Certainly, most of the major assassinations, I would say I have a base on most of the big cases, but my wealth of knowledge is certainly on the JFK case. And for me, it's just deja vu. I mean, though I didn't obviously live through it many years before my time, for me to spend this much time studying it, it feels like I'm reliving it again. I mean, you're watching the way that, again, and I think that a journalist, one of the few that I think is honest as far as covering the semi-mainstream, and certainly because of Snowden, made Glenn Greenwald fairly mainstream, whether the mainstream wants to admit it or not.
Oh yeah, did you?
It catapulted him, and he. Go ahead.
Oh, did you see I think I may have even gotten this from something that you posted. The Glenn Greenwald, and we played this on the show not too long ago, where he was on Democracy Now, and he talked about how, holding the CIA up as a hero against Trump was really the wrong way to go. That we were not, that really wasn't, that we were kind of like in a rock and a hard place in a way between the two.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and his, again, regardless of where anyone stands on Trump, and again, for me, there's no political affiliation when I'm kind of getting into my analysis of the deep state, certainly, and I try to really try my best to look at it. It's made me look at people of my own party and distance myself because of things that I found out. Different people that people are loyal to and things of that nature. So, I really respect Glenn's take on it. Is that, look, I mean, regardless of where you stand on Trump, I mean, if we set the precedent that, somebody else I was listening to today, and I can't pinpoint who it was, it said something along the lines of, if we allow this soft coup to go forward, and let's be honest, that's what's going on. Impeachment is one thing. We could get into, a topic for another time and discuss whether or not there's grounds for impeachment. There may or may not be. To me, I think there are probably some things in there to be had, and that's more of a political thing on a lot of different aspects. But I think that if we allow a soft coup to go forward, that sets a precedent for, any president that comes in, and they don't like him. It may be somebody. If for instance, to play devil's advocate, if somebody's, if somebody's opinion is, hey, I'm a big Donald Trump fan. Okay, well, you're a Donald Trump fan, but or I'm sorry, you're not a Donald Trump fan, and so. Well, if, say, Hillary Clinton wouldn't have been elected, and who's to say that there are different factions, within the agency, who's to say that they didn't, in this cycle? There's a lot of different factions. There's a lot of different leaks. There's a lot of different hacks. I mean, we can dissect all of that. It was definitely a action-packed year, to say the least, in deep political research. And but if we allow this to go forward, then it becomes, well, any other candidate that comes in, and they're not liked by the inner political machinations of the deep state, then out they go. And so, for instance, I would liken it to, I worked on a recall election when Scott Walker was recalled as governor of Wisconsin, and to show you kind of where the public's mindset is that, look, I mean, this guy. Really, in a democratic state, he got elected. Whether he lied, made false campaign promises or not, the Democratic Party my party at the time got the signatures, to recall him, and they lost the recall election, and that's because, by and large, the people of the state, even in the exit polls, show union households who should have been among the tops, the list to say boot this guy out, were still kind of coming back to him because they were people who said, well, it's not that I like or dislike him, it's I really don't like the idea of a recall, because then it becomes, well, you can recall anybody you want to then, and I would compare that a little bit to this. It becomes, well, if we condone this or we turn a blind eye to this, then what happens with somebody else that comes in? So, it really to me is a nonpartisan thing. I really look at it like Glenn Greenwald does. Look, I'm personally not a Trump fan, and I think he's doing some things that are not all that great for the country. And so we need to that's an argument for another time. But to turn a blind eye to this, is wrong. It's wrong. It's
Well, here's a question, and this is something that has been on my mind for a while. What exactly is it that they do not like about Trump, besides his brashness, besides his arrogance and his ego? What is it that they actually disagree with him about? Because they can use that brashness, that arrogance, and that ego to tarnish him and all this kind of stuff. But is there something that Trump represents that they hate? Because it has to be that. It has to be something fundamental like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're exactly right. It's definitely, I think that's the root right there, because for someone who's, the deep state isn't an entity that cares about a wall being built. Certainly there's some financial, considerations in there. So I guess that maybe might enter into it. But, looking at it as and again, for me, that's, I have to look at myself and say, I've got to try and take my political self out of it and say, well, not what the Democrats are saying. Because again, though I try and be unbiased, I certainly hear more, from that side of the aisle because I've worked on that side of the aisle. But, when you're talking about the deep state, you've got to sit here and look and say, well, why, what is it that he's opposing? And to me, I mean, there's not too much that jumps right out. I mean, he's his corporate connections, his Wall Street connections. Obama was certainly had those. Most of Obama's administration was very Wall Street connected. Yeah. Again, I've no qualms there. I mean, it's certainly not a point I can argue. So I mean, it's not really anything that jumps out. I mean, it could be potentially by having people like Bannon by his side, and certainly, again, personally, I'm not a Bannon fan, but that isn't to say that it's like anybody else. You may not like somebody. There's journalists out there that I may not like. I may not agree with them. They might write 50 out of 52 pieces that I might just detest or completely disagree with. And then once or twice, it's that old, a broken clock is right once. Well, maybe somebody that he's brought into his frame, maybe it's not him. Maybe it's somebody he brought in there. I mean, this is a guy that's bringing in outsiders like, his son-in-law, and again, even as a Democrat, and certainly my party's throwing stones there because, well, it becomes that, the family thing, and whether or not it's impeachable or whether or not it's enforceable at all, is one thing. It definitely is a gray area. I mean, obviously JFK had his brother, and it wasn't until after that really precedent was set, right, for keeping family members out. But I think that his mindset, I mean, even speaking as a Democrat, I'm somebody who looks at Jared Kushner as somebody who's got an interesting perspective. Again, I'm not a fan of Trump, and not only because of a couple maybe select policy differences. It's because of some of the character things, and that's a political, that's a personal thing. But looking at why the deep state would target him, for me, it's really got to be he's surrounding himself with so many outsiders, and I think that's probably a lot of it. I think that if he would have aligned himself with only Reince Priebus and maybe more establishment picks, and not brought in some of these, very unique outsiders, I think bringing Flynn in, and I think cozying up to Russia, though I think that's certainly been blown out of proportion. And talk about deja vu. That was one that they used on President Kennedy. That he was obviously seeking détente with Russia, and whether you're a socialist or not. I mean, we weren't looking to we were looking for mere coexistence. That was what Kennedy was really seeking, and so. But there are people that, whether it be the anti-Castro Cuban elements that, for instance, that are still based in South Florida and many concentrates throughout the country, and they still have that hatred of Cuba and that regime. So any talk, whether it be Republican or Democrat, they don't care. They may be registered Republicans, but if they hear about you talking about this issue and, oh, you're going to be on the side of doing business with Cuba now, we don't want to. We don't want to deal with you, and it may be worse than I'm not going to vote for you, And so I see that kind of with them trying to lump. I think that again, I'm not inside the man's head. I can't say what his intentions were. I certainly think that the liberal media, even as a Democrat, I'm the first to point out, the bias there as I'm trying to correct on the inside. People on my side, of course, they're neophytes when it comes to really deep politics, but trying to say, look a little bit closer at this. I'm not saying that obviously there's some questions. There's certainly been some cozying up with some of his picks. Flynn, is definitely, that's something we've got to dig into. But to sit here and say, I mean, that certainly could have stepped on the deep states. I mean, these are elements within the deep state that were part of the first Cold War. And so if they're still around, I mean, they still have that, they still have that kind of animosity toward Russia and I think that's probably part of it, but you're right. I mean, to me, there's not, aside from those couple, maybe items, I mean, there's not really anything that jumps right out. It's very interesting. And which kind of tells me that there are some sort of, civil wars kind of going in between different elements, of the deep state, whether it's, DIA versus CIA, whether it's, I mean, that's, factions. I mean, there's so much. Yeah. I mean, and who knows? I mean, to sit here and study that, I mean, I can't even imagine what kind of time. I mean, just to be able to look at the different deep political events, and, you look into JFK, and that's really how I got into the other deep political events. Case, and you start seeing names coming up, and every so often I'd watch a documentary on Iran-Contra, on CIA, Gary Webb allegations, and then all of a sudden, these names come up, and then so I get a book out on that and read, okay, these names keep coming up, and yeah, I mean, and that's where it all really grows out of. And then, the mainstream says, oh, well, see, you're linking everything together. You're a conspiracy theorist. Everything's all linked. And it's like, no, it's not a matter of necessarily Act 1 was 100% planned by the same people as Act 2, but there may be factions that had some sort of, to do with Event 1 that also had something to do with Event 2. So it's kind of that same linkage that you've got to kind of look for in this, is try and, find out. But it's, we're only finding things out about the JFK case through the declassification of records that took so many years to kind of get into, and now really we've got, I know that we talked a little bit about touching on WikiLeaks, and they certainly have a role to play there. I mean, that's what they've done, and certainly what, whistleblowers like Edward Snowden have done. Otherwise, these are documents that they would have been conveniently destroyed. I mean, most of these documents, I'd be hard pressed, to imagine any of these documents really coming out, seeing the light of day. I mean, even when the Assassination Records Review Board was established, the Secret Service, I forget how many records it was, but they conveniently had discarded records before they had to report to the Assassinations Records Review Board. And obviously, in the wake of MK Ultra, Richard Helms was said to have destroyed, boxes upon boxes of documents. And so these are things that I'm sure would have never seen the light of day. But because of whistleblowers and because of hacktivists and things like that, we have that chance. And unfortunately, there's a price to pay for all that, because these are people who are going to jail or risking going to jail for what they believe in. But, it's a lot of good questions there.
Let's talk a little bit about the role of the deep state in these political assassinations. Like, I know JFK, that's your big thing, but what about like Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, these kind of more small scale assassinations?
Well, I think that those are really the big three. There's certainly, certainly I would kind of throw in there, the 638 alleged assassination attempts on Fidel Castro. And when I say 638, take that number as I italicize that number in your mind. That's a number that comes from, their Cubans counterintelligence chief Fabian Escalante, who reported, locating 638 alleged attempts between 1959 and 2000. So these attempts were still going on according to Cuban intelligence. So that's one that I would definitely throw in there. I mean, and these are ones that I always use those examples because look, those are confirmed. We have number of on the books attempts that didn't pan out, but we know that. So obviously it becomes a little bit more sketchy, when you're talking about killing members of our own state. And so, JFK certainly, could talk all day about that one, but, the King assassination, I think that really getting into talking about King is, I think that when you look at, I think a lot of people look and they think that he got killed because of his stance on civil rights. And that fits perfectly into the box of, why he was killed if it were by a lone gunman, James Earl Ray. But
sure,
if you're looking at it with a wide angle lens, it's really what got him into trouble in my mind. And I think that the research really bears me out on this, is that when he started really criticizing the Vietnam War and really became less about just civil rights and more about the war. And then those are the two common threads that, tie the King and RFK assassinations together. These are two people who were talking about ending the war. I mean, certainly King was from the role of as an activist, and Robert Kennedy as someone who's running for the presidency. And David Talbot, who wrote one book, again, on the Devil's Chessboard, which is outstanding. Another good book that he wrote on the subject of RFK was Brothers. And he really kind of goes with the thesis that ultimately Robert F. Kennedy was going to, that only the powers of the presidency would really show the truth of his brother's death. And I definitely believe that there's truth to that. And his research really kind of speaks for itself in there. Some say it's speculative, but I think that a lot of the sources that Talbot goes with are good ones. And I think that that's part of it. I think that just like with JFK, if you're going to talk about motive, I mean, there's oftentimes several motives for killing somebody, and some of those motives are tied to different entities. Sometimes one or two entities have, 10 different reasons, that they could get rid of somebody. But I really think that, when you're talking about motive for these two assassinations, it really is the common thread is their opposition to the Vietnam War, which, I mean, directly counters the deep state, that military turned intelligence complex that really wants to take out, that really wants to push their agenda. I believe Lyndon Johnson was certainly pushed on Vietnam. I mean, obviously, his NSAM, National Security Action Memo, that he signed in the wake of JFK's assassination. I think it was a day or two after.
Yeah.
That authorized the war. And again, the JFK film does a great job of, showing, well, you get me elected and I'll get you your damn war. Again, great line, who knows whether or not anything like that was said, but certainly, the decision-making process that you kind of see LBJ go through is, look, this is somebody who wants to do whatever he has to do to become the president. He'll do just about anything. They certainly had leverage. Not only did he want to be president, he had, he was going to be forced off the ticket and probably be sent to jail by the Kennedys. So, he's definitely somebody that the deep state can put up and say, all right, well, this guy's going to push our war agenda.
Oh, yeah, he had his reasons for sure.
And again, and coming back, I mean, it's funny that by talking about these other cases, how many ideas pop in about, oh, well, we were talking about Trump. Okay, well, so this is somebody who's really looking at, some of his foreign policy, decisions maybe sound a little bit more hawkish, but I would argue all day, every day, that Hillary Clinton is the hawk of the two. And this is somebody who, again, is trying to get close to at least forming some sort of a relationship with Russia, whether it's good or bad. One thing that it does not is it doesn't, lay the groundwork for any kind of military action. And so, that's something that these two, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, and JFK, all opposed. JFK was certainly showing that he was really kind of gearing toward kind of pulling out. We certainly know that Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy were against it, and Robert F. Kennedy, if elected, would have had the power, to do something about it. So, I think that's really the common thread. I think that they were enemies of the deep state, and I think that as a civil rights leader, I think that there's multiple motives. I really think for both of them. Like I said, RFK, it becomes, well, who knows what he can unearth on his brother's death. For Martin Luther King, maybe it becomes, well, as in his role, in addition to really kind of going after the war. Look, I mean, this is on the books that J. Edgar Hoover was trying to, push this guy to kill himself. We know that military intelligence now was heavily surveilling him. And by the way, the historical record forgets that a civil trial found, a conspiracy, in that case. And that's the last official record, just like the last official record in the JFK and MLK cases by our own government.
Right. It gets glossed over, though. People don't remember.
Yeah.
What do you think about E. Howard Hunt's confession?
I think it's like, really, I've dealt with a number of different intelligence operators in different capacities. I've called some friends, as much as you can call somebody who's worked in intelligence friends, a lot of researchers, that we work with in the community. Have come from intelligence backgrounds. Some are marvelous researchers, and they may be 100% legit. But you always have to ask yourself whether this is somebody who's a researcher, somebody comes forward to sell a book, or somebody that you find. Though as somebody who's really kind of worked, in public safety and kind of conducted investigations on more of a private and kind of university police kind of environment, you really kind of look, you tend to trust witnesses more that you kind of go and find, because it becomes, well, are they looking for something? Are they looking to sell a book? Are they looking for attention? Are they just crazy? Things like that, which isn't to say that, again, there's, you can't discount. I don't think most of these statements by these intelligence operators. Hunt's one that I'm really on the fence on. I think, when you talk about disinformation, a lot of people really put it at 90% of disinformation is the truth, and you obscure the most important points out of that 100%, out of that 10% that's left, and so and to me that makes sense, because look, if you're a seasoned researcher, you're not going to give me 5 or 6 names, and I'm going to be able to look and I'm going to say this person doesn't connect with this person, we're going to go to school on these, it's going to be hard. And that's kind of the problem that I have with Hunt, is that, he names names of people that are, that could feasibly have worked together, but the hierarchy doesn't seem right. And, I'm not a big, first let me preface by saying I'm not take the disclaimer for the label of a conspiracy theorist. I deal in documents. I deal in, I deal in identifying facts out of those documents.
Sure.
And sure, there's always, no different than an investigator has that, an investigator, whether it be in a police department or a government capacity, or a private investigator even, would say that they have a gut instinct. Well, so, somebody may have that quote conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, it's got the negative connotation, but yeah, we've got those, but, I deal with, I try and find as much as you can paper trails on these things. Well, obviously, we know as researchers, that you're not going to be able to find, there's not going to be those 2, 3, 4 documents, even if they're not documents that, are destroyed. It's not going to be that simple. And so it's really a matter of kind of piecing together and trying to put names together and things like that. And so I'm not a person, who really buys into the hierarchy that starts with LBJ at the top. I just don't see that. And so for me, that, I don't, that doesn't mean that I discount everything in his confession. I think that there may be elements of truth. I think that most of these guys that have worked in intelligence, whether it's 90% or 70%, I don't think that most, information that they pass is 100% false. I mean, at least not to somebody who knows any better. Maybe the media will buy it, but if you're passing that on to researchers, I think that they know enough to know that, we're going to do our homework. And so I don't really buy into that. For me, LBJ was more of a, as I kind of alluded to earlier, that stool pigeon. He was the person there that did he want JFK out of the picture? Sure he did. Was it self-preservation? Sure he did. I always get in arguments with my own in the Democratic Party, and I say, look, LBJ wasn't a good guy. Whatever you want to believe, he's not a good guy. And whether he, and they're like, oh well, you're a conspiracy theorist. Of course, you think he was involved in JFK, things like that. And I kind of say, look, my thing is he had the motive, the means, and probably the opportunity to an extent, but there were too many wheels turning long before Dallas, when you get into talking about the different assassination plots, that we've unearthed in Miami, in Tampa, in Chicago, and things like that. And there were just pieces that he couldn't necessarily move. And like I said, for me, it boils down to the hierarchy. I certainly think that he had an advanced knowledge. There's a difference between someone having advanced knowledge. Certainly that, by the criminal definition, that ties them into the conspiracy. That's like saying, the simple definition is if, you tell me today that tomorrow you're going to go and, commit a burglary, and I don't do anything to prevent it, there's legal ground to charge me if you can prove that, that I didn't, that I didn't do anything about it, that I had foreknowledge. And so it's kind of like that. And so I think that he definitely had organized crime connections, things like that. He may have pulled some strings on his end. Certainly he was more of a phase 2. He was more of a cover-up guy. I mean, the JFK case and any of these cases, I think you've got two phases. You've got the actual act, and then you've got the cover-up. And there are people who have different motives to participate in a cover-up than to participate, in Act 1. Again, proof positive. The Central Intelligence Agency, though, I don't believe that there was a order that filtered down, whether on paper or in someone's ear, that look, on this day this is going to happen. I think that as an agency, I mean, you have to. Jim Garrison summed it up best. He said, look, if as an agency, they found out that if I'm the CIA and I find out that people that I have worked with, whether they be official employees, contractors, people that we paid money to in any capacity, if they were involved in killing the president of the United States, all of a sudden, we have to cover that up. We can't, and so it becomes, it's kind of a different, you got to kind of look at the two differently. Certainly, that certainly is, to me, in my mind, it's just as reprehensible. It's just as bad as those who pulled the triggers, maybe even worse. But you really have to kind of look at that. And I think that LBJ was more of a phase 2 guy. So, Hunt is somebody that I think had some knowledge. I think that his son, St. John, is really kind of made the rounds at kind of getting that story out there. I'm definitely interested in the connections between his mother, and her plane crash. That's definitely one that it really is kind of hard to get out of your head when you're talking about convenient deaths.
Yeah, for real.
You know, and so it's definitely there's definitely something there. And so I guess what I'm saying is, you really, when it comes to dealing with people in intelligence, I've worked with, you know, a number of different people. You talk about Jerry Patrick Hemming, you know, is a big one. There's people in the JFK research community, you know, and I use that term loosely. We bicker like we're family, and some are trustworthy, some are not. Some are out to sell books, some are not. But you know, we take stories different ways sometimes. You know, there's different. You've got to kind of look at some of these intelligence operatives. Well, Jerry Patrick Hemming tells a bunch of researchers, well, you know, on this day this happened, and so you know, you've got different people kind of dissecting it and their take on it. But like I said, I would take anything anybody who worked in intelligence said with a grain of salt. But for me, I'm a big verify guy, no matter who tells it to me, whether it be the mainstream media, whether it be an intelligence operative that I trust, whether it be an intelligence operative or former intelligence operative, if such an animal exists. You know, I'm going to try and verify that kind of stuff. And so you really do have to take it all with a grain of salt. So ultimately I'm on the fence with that one. I definitely, it's to me, it's not as simple as 4 or 5 names. It's just, you know, that was just too convenient. Whether that was one last way, I mean, this is somebody who hated the Kennedys to the day he died. So if on his deathbed he could spin the wheel just a little bit more, you know, maybe he would. And maybe there's definitely some elements there. I mean, and again, that isn't to say that the people that he names, Cord Meyer, I mean, he names right people. And, you know, I've talked to a lot of different people and we're like, you know, these names are all people that I kind of fit, but they kind of fit with different people. Like they're people that are kind of odd to be working together.
Well, Cord Meyer would have had a motive because JFK slept with his wife.
Yeah.
So that would have been all the motive that he would have needed. What about scandals and disgracing people? Like, for instance, like Watergate. A lot of people speculate that there was something set up there to where Nixon just kind of fell into the trap.
Yeah, I think that's become probably in the present day, their kind of retribution is the wrong word. I think that's the way that they deal with problems. You know, in today's age, which isn't to say that, you know, that there aren't going to be, you know, convenient deaths out there, in much the way that whether you agree that they were all convenient or not. I mean, there's too many deaths in the JFK case again. And I bring that case up because, you know, to my knowledge, I know that there were also some convenient deaths in some of the other cases, but you know, that's a real big one. You know, when people pass away right around the time, you know, the surges were right around the time that the House Select Committee was getting into it, right around the Church Committee, and I think even a few, including Richard Case Nagel, who's really an enigma all to himself. You know, whether you believe everything that he has to say. Dick Russell is a brilliant journalist and has wrote a lot, you know, about Nagel in his book. And so I think that, you know, you've really got to kind of look at that. And I'm sorry, what was your original question? I got off on a tangent.
About like something like Watergate, you know, like Nixon,
okay, so,
and you know, because you know the E. Howard Hunt, of course, pops up again in that. So
yeah, so no, and that's, I mean, I think that for me, it becomes a situation where if we have to eliminate a threat to the national security state, to the deep state, term it however you want to, I think that, you know, it's got to be dealt with. And so if it's too messy, you know, Jim Garrison, during his investigation, I know that, you know, it was said in the movie, X's character, again, whether the basis for X, that was Fletcher Prouty, and I think there was one or two other people that was a compilation character of, you know, ever really said it. It was, you know, look, you're too visible now. They can't take you out, you know, which makes sense, whether it was said or not. I mean, that makes absolute sense. And I think you've got that now, I think, in a lot of different cases. Does that mean that you're not going to conveniently disappear? Well, we see that the way that people who deal with the Russian regime, you know, are conveniently disappearing, you know, whether, you know, who knows which side within the deep state or which side within, you know, Putin's regime are taking people out, but they're certainly disappearing. But I think that if you can't or don't want to take somebody out that way, you smear their character. I think that, you talk about journalists, and I know that was another point that we wanted to kind of get into as well. You talk about journalists like Danny Casolaro, Gary Webb, ones that I'm the most familiar with. These were guys that got too close, and it became,
yeah, and I want to talk about that in a little bit for sure.
Yeah, and so you get too close, and I think that was really the situation with Nixon. I think that, again, independent of political shenanigans, certainly, may or may not have been impeachable. But I think what he did, among other things, I think as far as not what he did as a public official, what he did necessarily to the country, but what he did, again, as you asked earlier, that made him a threat to the deep state, I think was, that he got too close in the Watergate break-in, which really, I've read a number of different books and talked to a number of different people on that case that are, that kind of live and breathe that case more like I live and breathe the JFK case. And, there's really so many questions that still have to be answered. But for me, I come back at the Bay of Pigs, the whole Bay of Pigs thing. And when Nixon alludes to that, and, Haldeman said that I always felt that was code for, the Kennedy assassination. And you listen to it, and I don't even think you have to be, just if you take a layperson, you play that portion of the tape and you listen to it, and you're going to say that doesn't make any sense. It's forced into the conversation, and it doesn't really have anything to do with really what he's talking about. There's clearly something that he's alluding to, and I don't think it really takes, anybody who has an honest mind, unless it's somebody who's set out, to kind of smear the discussion before it begins. And so I think that that's part of it. I think that, whether he authorized it or not, whether or not the motive for the Watergate break-in had anything to do with, I don't necessarily think Nixon was consciously digging and trying to, locate people who had went after Kennedy. I think that for whatever reason, Nixon became on the dark side of the deep state, and I think that, they set him up ultimately, and I think that in the process, he had gotten too close. I think that by using Hunt, and I do believe in some way he was connected to the JFK case. His involvement in some capacity is just, he was too close to all the right people, whether it was advanced knowledge, whether he was in Dallas or he wasn't. I think it's been pretty established that he wasn't in Dallas. Regardless, I think that there was definitely some role. There was definitely something he was privy to, whether it be Oswald in Mexico City, whether it be Cuban operations. I think that, he knew, but I think that he obviously knew something. If, these are conversations that he's having, and then he ends up,
right. Exactly.
He ends up, getting tossed out of office. And so, it's convenient. And you talk about, Bill Clinton, and certainly, the Clintons. I kind of look at that as, again, speaking as a Democrat. The Hillary and Bill Clinton certainly don't have a, they've got a lot of questions in their past, and not all of them are related to the Clinton Foundation. There's just a lot of, again, you talk about scandals. There's a lot in their background. There's the convenient death of you'll find we keep using this word convenient over and over. Well, Vince Foster disappears, and so does Whitewater. And so, with all that in mind, there was something that potentially he had on them as well. Because let's face it, if you look at it from a pure political point of view, Bill Clinton made an effort to work with both sides of the aisle. He wasn't even beloved by the Democrats because he did that. And so if he was playing nice with everybody, why would they be so dead set on jamming him up and trying to get him impeached and kicked him out and get him kicked out of there? Again, it becomes, Oswald was quoted as saying, well, if I leave, or if I take out a president rather, being that it's the American system of government that the vice president's going to take over. So basically, why would I kill the president when the vice president's going to take over and they have largely the same policies, type of thing. And so, it becomes that. Well, if it was a pure political thing, so you're going to have Al Gore, they had nothing to jam that guy up on. He's pretty vanilla, and so whether that was I would necessarily put that right up there as much as I would Watergate. But when you talk about scandals, there's a lot of common threads that bring these together, and again, whether that has anything to do with Hillary Clinton, love her or hate her, I certainly think that what we're looking at is a lot of different elements with different interests. Some are the same, but I think some are different within the deep state. And I think that maybe there's some people who didn't want Hillary. Maybe there's some that wanted her. And I don't buy that this was all Russia either. At least the case hasn't been shown, and I think that's something I think Glenn Greenwald has done a great job of reporting on and saying, look, this is a guy who swings pretty liberal on social policies. Like I said, he makes no bones. I can't stand Trump,
Sure.
But look, liberal media, what are you talking about? There's no evidence, of hacking. If there is of Russian hacking, come out and show it. Even if you're going to argue national security, come on. If you're trying to prove a case like that and you're truly trying to sink this guy, wouldn't you show your hand? And I just throw it all out on the table, but they're not doing that. So I think their bluff is fairly been called, but I think that a lot of these different scandals really tie into it, and I think that it becomes a whole different school of political science. I think deep politics is if such a negative connotation, hadn't this effort to really kind of push this down and label people who look into and ask these questions as conspiracy theorists, as whether any of your listeners are somebody who considers themselves in, I don't know yet if we would call it a movement. It's because it's become a catchphrase of the media, the alt-right. Well, even if we want to call it that, you've got to really be able to look at kind of what the media is saying on some of these things. Fox News, for instance, you talk about media coverage. Fox News is pretty well pro-Trump. So you would think that out of all the mainstream media news, they'd be more apt to talk about the deep state. Well, by and large, they don't. And I was watching a video earlier from RT, and I can't remember who the host was. Maybe it'll come back to me before our time's done. But he basically, was touching on how, why isn't Fox picking up on this? He played a clip of Dennis Kucinich speaking, and I forget who the interviewer was, but he was basically talking about, and he didn't use the words deep state. He talked about the military intelligence apparatus, and he basically said, that's the core behind all this Russia stuff. We need to look at this and what motive they have to do this. Basically, like we were saying, we got to look at the what makes him a threat, to the deep state to be able to do this. Though he didn't use the words. Well, the interviewer comes back and, she basically either didn't get the question, but I don't buy that she didn't get the question. It was like, well, so basically what you're saying is that this leaks are coming from the White House. It was like she went somewhere completely different. And it's like, no, that's not what he was saying at all. So, this is Fox News. If a network that's pretty established in Camp Trump is afraid to talk about the mainstream media, and then you've got the liberal media. They talk about it, and they talk about it as the means to, for smear, and that becomes, again, it's they link that to it's again, whether or not you're a fan of Alex Jones or not, it becomes trying to link. Okay, well, we're going to find somebody that you hate. We're going to find somebody within the collection of people that you're for, and we're gonna find some way to link some of these pieces together to discredit you. We're gonna take you and link you to the alt-right. For me, to take a case study for somebody like me to talk about this, whether you're a Democrat or whether you work in politics or not. If you've got a lot of people on the left side of the aisle, you talk about this, and they certainly will come at me and say, so you're basically supporting Trump. And, of course I would say, I'm not supporting him at all. That has nothing to do with it. You've got to look at this, with a wide angle lens.
Yeah, the thing is, so many people can't. They're so caught up in the dichotomy stuff that they just cannot look at it any other way. They just think that if you say anything that's even like mildly supportive of Trump, they like think, oh, you're just a Trumper. Or if you're mildly supportive of Hillary Clinton, well, you're just a liberal. It's just silly.
Yeah, I mean, but for their purposes, it works. I mean, for a mainstream media that's really the top, the right arm of the military, and certainly the intelligence complex. And there are there exceptions to that rule? Sure, there are. You've got Democracy Now! And different kind of elements of the mainstream, kind of sort of mainstream. I would kind of, for example, you've got somebody like Russ Baker, who was more of a mainstream journalist. He wrote for a number of big papers, and then he really he wrote the book on the Bushes, on the Bush dynasty, and talked about, really Bush Senior's role. If, again, I'll kind of let your listeners look at the book on that one. I certainly have some of my own thoughts, but there's definitely a lot of common threads that tie Bush Senior to this. Well, he stepped on that rail. You talk about stepping on the third rail in politics. Well, this is definitely a rail you don't step on if you're in the mainstream media. I mean, he touched that word, that C word, and it's not the other C word. It's the word in the mainstream media. It's the word in politics that will just fry you. And so he look at his Wikipedia page. I mean, just as a starting point, I mean, it's just a complete smear job. It's basically like, look, this guy was a credible journalist, but now he's got into some of this stuff, and people don't really know that much about him. And what they know now, he's kind of discredited himself. And Jeff Morley, who's written, who's one of the best journalists I know, and he still kind of has been able to really kind of stay on the mainstream. But you've got Russ Baker opened up, who, what, why, and he covers. I'd recommend anybody, to that website. And I'm not a contributor or anything, so I'm not getting any kickback. But Russ has really put together, a very good archive. He's got a lot of big name deep political researchers that write, and he's got a specific genre of deep politics. You can hit the tag, and you've got all sorts of stories, especially now. Anything from current events on Trump to way back to revisionist stories talking about JFK and Watergate, and all these different surefire conspiracies. So I mean, but people like that really kind of step on that rail, they're kind of pushed out. I mean, there's that, from a political standpoint, I mean, that's basically what's happening to me, and I'm entirely okay with it. And what maybe most of these journalists are. Gary Webb, certainly had problems with it, whether or not his hand was forced. I mean, the fact that he was depressed and, in his later years, I mean, I think you have to look at that. I think that anybody would be. I think that when you have an entire profession that not only just smears you, the guy could never work again. I mean, his own had turned on him. And so, it's difficult whether or not he was depressed to the point of, a lot of people are depressed. That doesn't mean that they're depressed enough to take their own life. So again, I don't necessarily consider that, I don't necessarily directly connect the dots on that. I think you really have to take an honest look at it. But I think
it was kind of clear that he probably did commit suicide, but at the same time, I mean, what he revealed, I mean, it pretty much ruined him, honestly.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's been documented since that the CIA was really making every attempt through the media. I mean, this is document after document. We're talking about that. We know he was under surveillance. We know all these things, and so he was being smeared. I mean, at that point, it became, for somebody like that, for people that are pulling the strings back there. I mean, why do you have to take somebody out? Why do you have to, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but why do you have to waste a bullet on him when you smear him? That's a journalist. That's all it takes. It's just like if somebody, a journalist knows that if they take a leak, whether it be, a leak, so to speak, if from the White House, they take information and they release that, if they're called to testify and they release their source, they'll never work again. Their career is over, and it's almost that same situation. Well, they know that that's his livelihood. Let's just hit him where he lives, where he sleeps, all of the above. They certainly, Kill the Messenger was a good film. I've read, a couple of the different books that, Dark Alliance that he wrote. I've read a couple others on the subject on his pursuits, and I basically come along with the same. Look, he probably did it, but look, the guy also shot himself twice in the head. That's not fairly common. I'm sure you could find cases. I don't, again, I tend to err on the side of he probably did it, but the way that I look at it is ultimately, it's whether indirectly or directly, the CIA and its agents caused his demise, and so that to me is as good as pulling the trigger, and I think that's really all you need to know. And I think for some people that are threats, I think that's all that they have to do. That's what they usually do first. They go after your family. They went after Gary Webb for having an affair. They get into your personal life, all those different things. And so, and for some people, maybe that won't faze you. So then they hit you with something else, and it's different for everybody else. But it's definitely one that you have to look at.
Yeah, but one that's Gary Webb. I mean, because of the movie that came out a couple of years ago, and you're right, it is a very good movie. He's kind of well known. There's been a lot of documentaries about him. There's been a documentary that's been on Netflix about Rick Ross, not the rapper, but Rick Ross, the drug dealer who was one of Gary Webb's sources that he used, that was going to prison at the time. But another journalist that's not very well known is Danny Casolaro. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's one where I think that the evidence really is hard to argue. When you take a case where a guy meets with someone in a hotel room, the day before he died, he gets a stack of documents from the guy. His source gives him a stack of documents, a tape deck, a briefcase, containing a draft copy of his book. He always had it with him, right? Well, they were never found when the hotel room was searched. And so, that's one big question. In going after what's been called, and all you got to do is Google the octopus. And you'll find there's a lot of great resources out there on this one. It's a subject unto itself, and we'd be here all day talking about just this one case. It's a fascinating one, as far as the basis for his investigation. But basically he ties a lot of people together in this network. The Inslaw scandal, certainly the big one, and that one in it of it itself, you've got people that are still, these are cases where they're still, a threat. I would say that, you've got people like Michael Riconosciuto, who's a witness in that case, who also is kind of tangentially linked to the JFK case. He's kind of got some connections there that, some information has been supplied. He's in prison, but this is a guy who fears for his life. So there are still, connections to here and now. Not that the government doesn't have every reason to want to keep, JFK's case from being outed even all these years. But, these are cases where you're talking that there could be still people implicated that are actually alive, whether they're 60, 70, 80, 90, these are people that could still be alive. So it's definitely dangerous. And if it's dangerous now, imagine then. He stepped on the octopus, and, something got him. He had gotten death threats. He had told his brother, a week before he went to Martinsburg, West Virginia, which is funny. I actually worked the state of West Virginia on a political campaign this past year, and he was one of the first things I thought about when I crossed the border. And that was actually in the congressional district I worked in, Martinsburg, and he told his brother, "Look, if anything happens to me, don't believe it's an accident." He talked about a lot of different threats, and there's a good book out there on that one. Sherry Seymour. The name of the book escapes me, but if you Google Sherry Seymour, it's Sherry with a C, Cheri. You'll come up with it. And it really kind of touches on the core of really what this network is. But basically, he connected a lot of people from a lot of different events. He kind of brought people that were in Iran-Contra into BCCI scandal. So you're talking financial, you're talking drugs, you're talking about, all sorts of different things. The Ends Law, this is a case where, one of the big ones that stands out for me, is that they found a half-empty bottle of red wine and a broken wine glass next to the bathtub, and there was an empty can of beer, right, found inside the tub. Well, no alcohol was ever found in Castellero's bloodstream. And no testing was done. I mean, there's so many different questions on that. And the brother, I think it was weeks after. It was substantial time. It was a week, 2 weeks. Don't quote me on that 100%. But it was substantial time before his family was notified. And so, I mean, there's so many questions with that one. And I think that, these are cases where I'm really kind of look not only in my own personal research, with the organization that we're kind of, my colleagues and I are really kind of putting forward is, look, we not only do we want to really touch on these political assassinations and talk about the drugs, talk about all the scandals. We want to talk about the people like the Danny Castelleros of the world, that whether it be in the capacity of, look, they may in fact be another deep state event in and of themselves. They may have been eliminated. They may have been a target. Well, maybe Gary Webb wasn't eliminated per se, but that's somebody else that we want to talk about. We want to talk about these people that, not only what they were investigating, but really kind of put them forward and allow their legacy to, to continue to be out there. These are people whose names should be known, and it's sad that they're not. I mean,
agreed. Very much agreed with that. Absolutely. Where can people find out about your the Center for Deep Political Research?
So we are at www.cdpresearch.com. That's cdpresearch.com. It's the Center for Deep Political Research. We go by the acronym CDPR, which is kind of funny. We joked when one of my colleagues joked with me when we first came up with the name. He said, the other side is, with the acronym, we've got CDPR. If you say it slowly, it's CDPR, which is funny because the deep state, that's what they do. They're disinformation. It's CDPR, so it's I kind of chuckle to myself every time I think about that. But, that's probably, website is kind of under development. But there's a number of different ways to kind of contact our leadership team throughout that site. We're on Facebook. I would say that's our biggest venue right now. Though our organization itself is really in its baby stages. We're still, getting fully recognized as a nonprofit. We finally found a home in North Carolina. And it's going to be a while. We're still in the business planning stage of it all, but the ultimate goal is really to put together a small staff of researchers, to have investigative teams, to really be able to kind of have the element of, look, on one side we've got the research, and then on the other side we've got, whether it be we're putting out annual reports or essays. We'll probably also do podcasts, documentaries, things like that. So it'll be kind of taking it in, putting it out. I mean, it's a tall order. Just the idea of putting a think tank together that's nonpartisan. I mean, you look at most of the think tanks, and they're aligned one way or the other. And again, when you look at an organization, we'll be seeking 501c3 status. Well, we're seeking status of the government in which we're largely investigating. So, if that's not going to, if we're not already on their radar, and I'm sure that we are either individually or collectively, the second that we're on paper, that opens us up to, we have to make sure that, every number is set and perfect as it would be, because we've got a respectable base of folks behind us. But it's definitely something that, is kind of it's been something a long time coming for a number of deep political researchers. There's a couple other good organizations out there that we really want to work with. We're not looking to compete. I think that there should be a few think tanks out there devoted to deep political research, like I mentioned earlier. This is a whole school of thought. This is something that's not out there. It's not in the school books, and it should be. But the only way to really kind of win the war, and it's we're probably not going to win the war, but you got to kind of nick and chip away. Well, through organizations like this, but it's got to be more than the research. It's got to be, you're researching, but you're putting it out there. For me, as somebody who's worked in politics, done a lot with digital marketing and things like that, I like to think that myself and some of the people that we already have here with us, we're looking at ways to try and getting it out there, because it's one thing when you're preaching to the choir at other deep political researchers. Well, they're already liked us on Facebook and following us on Twitter, which again, we're on Instagram, Twitter, the handles CDP Research at CDP Research. But all that in mind, we've got our work ahead of us. But I think that it's something with a purpose. It's something that somebody should be doing, and I think that it's a fight that we're in for the long haul. So hopefully folks will come and give us a look and be patient. Like I said, as an organization, we're in the baby stages. Right now, we're just posting a whole lot on social media, trying to share some of the stuff that's already out there so that, we can bring in younger folks who might not be into this kind of thing, but they say, oh, okay, so I see how JFK gets into this, because otherwise, why do I care about JFK? Yeah, I think it's a conspiracy, but it happened, 50 plus years ago. It doesn't affect my life, but if you can show that, okay, well, that links to here and now, then it becomes more than just a, fun conspiracy theory to talk about with friends. It's, wow, this is what we do. So it's really about kind of putting the pieces out in front of everybody.
Yeah. Well, wow, that's impressive. And I think now also too, now's a good time, especially when we have all this talk about the deep state. This is out there in the consciousness, I think even more so now. So yeah.
And again, it's again to sound like that paranoid conspiracy theorist, it's a convenient time to come out with that. You got the two terms that, scare the hell out of me, or you've got in addition to conspiracy theorists, now you've got deep state, and you've also got fake news. Well, by opening the door that is fake news, if you have organizations like Facebook that start, detecting reported fake news sites and deleting posts and things like that, and a lot of that probably goes on different sites as it is, and so that's something that are really against us. Yes, there are legitimate sites that pretend to be news sites and they put themselves out there as news. We don't pretend, nor will we pretend, though we may have journalists working with us. We want to be a resource for journalists. We also hope to kind of bring the great journalists to the table so that they can write about the work. We'll issue reports and things of that nature. But you guys are the ones that kind of take it and push it out there. But if you start labeling it, well, this organization's fake news. Again, not to say that there's not legitimate people out there pushing, stuff that's just completely false. But to be fair, so is the mainstream media. There are a number of establishment kind of mainstream media folks on either side, that really kind of just push out stuff that has no base, that has no research. There's nothing behind it. But if you start terming stuff as, well, that's fake news, then it becomes like a death sentence. So I'm sure that they'll use them, but
everybody's using the fake news thing now. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly.
Well, anytime that you want to come on here and talk about what your organization is doing, what you're studying, you're more than welcome to, sir.
Great. Well, it's I really appreciate you having me on, Adam, and definitely stay in touch. You're a great resource. I think it's folks like you and
Thank you.
This podcast out there that look. It really does kind of take a network of people to really do this. It takes all the Penn Jones, all the Mae Brussells, all the people that been doing this for how many different years until their death. It just, we're all pieces of the puzzle, and so I appreciate what you do too. So thanks again for having me on.
Well, thank you so much, and stay on the line for us, Jeff. And we're going to close this section out on Conspirinormal.
All right, welcome back to Conspirinormal, everybody. That was fascinating. Jeff seems like a pretty knowledgeable, cool guy.
Yeah, he's very knowledgeable. He knows a lot of stuff. Sometimes you meet somebody on Facebook and you're maybe not too sure about them. He was posting a lot of interesting material that I really enjoyed looking at. And like I said, I just approached him about coming on. I think maybe he actually listened to the show. I think maybe he caught the show somehow, sent me a friend request, and then said something about liking the show, enjoying what I did. And I just said, well, hey, I'm looked at your stuff on Facebook and on the website. If you're interested in coming on, let's do this. So just kind of throwing that out there. And he accepted it, and very good. Somebody like kind of like our good friend Chris, right? That is a fan of the show, and we bring them on. And I like to do that because it's not just about like. I'm glad that we have guests like Nick Redfern and Randall Carlson and Peter Robbins and Richard Dolan. These guys that are really heavy hitters in the field. Even guys like Greg Bishop. I'm glad that we have those people and that they come on, but I also like to get people that are more, new, up and coming, people that may not have been heard from, right? And I think that makes things interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
On the show.
And just different new perspectives in general. I think you get a lot of newer, kind of alternative views that way too, because you're not hearing the same stuff that's been
right.
Kind of, done in every show through, for years and years and years.
Right. And I remember reading a article about, I think it was Tim Beckley that put this article up about podcasting and getting guests on. And he said, don't just get people that are well known, get people that are not as well known, mix it up a little bit. And I realized, like, hey, we're already doing that. So, what do you think about some of the stuff that he talked about as far as like the material?
I don't know. This is one I definitely need to listen back through.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, it's a real broad topic, and like I was saying earlier, it's one of the ones that to me it's one of the most interesting. At the same time, it's one of the most terrifying because it's something I really do like see evidence of everywhere we look. Especially these days, and it's just I don't know, scares me. The whole intelligence community.
Mm-hmm. It's a scary, frightening world, that's for sure. And it's been going on. I mean, long before even Trump came to power. I mean, it's been going on for a long, long time. And I don't know really what the issue is with Trump. Like I said before, people that think that he's the new JFK, and I really don't see him as that. I mean, you never know. You could have people in the intelligence community that might believe that he is a real danger, but the underhanded tactics that they're using is just a danger. So you're just fighting fire with fire. It's counterproductive.
Yeah,
all of it is,
and setting a bad precedent because that's not their job.
Yeah, exactly. The origins of the deep state I found it interesting that he put that at like the beginning of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I would almost put things at a little bit earlier than that. I would say that it really goes back to kind of like the Eastern establishment in many ways. Yale, Skull and Bones, these kind of things, which we can get more into that later. Because we have more important things to talk about right now.
Oh.
Which is, we're going back to Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil, and I really wish Luke was here to talk about this, but because it was his girlfriend that keyed me in on this. Dr. Phil apparently must have had a slump in the ratings after the Cash Me Outside girl. Because he got this girl on his show that was talking about sex trafficking. Now, I want to play a clip, and then I want to read a little bit of an article, and I want to talk about this and some things that I have noticed in this. So let's play the clip now. And actually, I have the power today.
When I was in the world of sex trafficking, I gave birth to children. I was allowed to get pregnant because men paid for that. I was pregnant several times, but I had several abortions. I had 3 that survived, 2 girls and a boy. When I had each child, they were all induced so that I wouldn't get too big. After I had each baby, they were taken away, but sometimes I would get to see them later as a reward. I don't know who their fathers are or where they are. I would like to have my kids with me, but I feel like if I did, I would just get them in trouble. It's been so difficult that even now I try to forget that I've had them.
Were you involved in raising these children?
No.
So how quickly were they taken away from you?
Dr.
Right after
Phil.
I had them.
So you've not seen them? You don't have a relationship with them?
I've seen them several times for like if I did something right or if he wanted me to do something, sometimes he would say I could see one of them after. And there was the younger girl I had, I saw her more often than the other 2.
Now, when he started trafficking you in a commercial way, how many times would you be expected to perform in a day?
I don't know. It's hard to even know sometimes when the day ended.
Would you see 3 or would you see 15
More like 15.
in a day?
Yeah, unless, if the client paid for something exclusive, then you could be with him longer. Or if they were doing something different than just sex, you have to finish with the client, do whatever they want. But if it was just sex, it would be a lot of men.
Okay, and when you would see 15 a day, where would you see them? Would it be in a hotel? Would they come to you? Would you go to them? Where would you see that many people?
Like a lot of times I would go to parties, and that's where I would see them. Sometimes they would come to me if I was being punished for something and I was put in one of his brothels, then they would come there. Sometimes I just would live in a room for a while where the men would come, but sometimes I would live somewhere and we would go to visit the men.
Uh-huh. And when you were flown, you said sometimes you were put on a private jet and flown into a big event, and you had to dress up and be highly groomed, and so you would fit in.
For the clothes, usually a guy would come in with a lot of expensive clothes and dress us up. I also had a hair and makeup artist.
That would fix you up for a big event.
Yeah.
And how much would you charge these people?
I didn't charge them anything.
You didn't handle the money.
No.
So it was direct to, who did handle the money?
I guess the people working for the man who owns me.
Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, I want to get back to the babies thing just a bit.
Okay.
but I want to get some background on what you guys just heard. Okay. To explain exactly what it is that, who this is that Dr. Phil had on his show. Right. It's just really just a coincidence that this is Dr. Phil again. You know, I don't want you to talk about Dr. Phil and Conspirinormal
He's
all the
not
time.
your favorite.
Even though he is, I just think damned hilarious. But this is from the New American. Dr. Phil interview exposes global elite pedophiles. I'll say it like Dr. Phil would. In what may be the most explosive episode of his high-profile television career, psychologist and TV show host Dr. Phil exposed the little-known phenomenon of human trafficking of sex slaves among the elite echelons of society. According to Dr. Phil, the victim, and reliable sources who corroborated her story, the girl, now a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, was flown around the world on private jets and forced to have sexual relations and engage in unspeakable acts with wealthy businessmen, political leaders, and other establishment figures. Much of what was described on the Dr. Phil show sounded satanic, analysts said. Experts who have studied the phenomenon, though, say this story is just the tip of a gigantic iceberg that stretches across the globe and is especially concentrated in power centers such as Washington, D.C., New York City, and London. With President Donald Trump vowing to crack down hard on human trafficking and sex slavery, victims and their advocates hope the scourge can be brought into the open, and that the perpetrators can be brought to justice regardless of their position in society. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is reportedly committed to doing everything within his power to bring down high-level pedophiles and human traffickers. The victim, who appeared on Dr. Phil's enormously popular show, identified only as Kendall, said on the program that she was sold to her owner by her parents at birth. "I was born into the world of sex trafficking," she said on the program, which aired nationwide on March 21st and was reportedly seen by millions of Americans. "I was forced to have sex with clients. One of my first memories was to think it was normal for men to be fondling babies. In one case, she was even forced by her owner to kill a baby," she said. In other instances, she was forced to rape children as young as 5 years old. Her entire existence revolved around the demands of her owner and the clients this criminal would pimp her out to. "My whole life I would travel all over the world and would go to some of the biggest events to meet clients and have sex with them," the victim explained. "They were all extremely rich and prominent members of society. Sometimes they would just want to have sex with me, and sometimes they would make me have sex with different people. When her owner was not around, she was supervised by watchers. Among those who raped her," she said, "were high-ranking law enforcement officials, major sports figures, and even top U.S. politicians. Oftentimes, she was taken to extravagant mansions where the clients would rape, torture, and abuse her and other captive children. Many of the clients were pillars of the community." Kendall continued, adding that some even owned private islands or large properties where they could rape and hunt their victims with impunity. And then it talks about the Lolita Express, which we've talked about on the show, the Jeffrey Epstein, which is proven to have happened. Also talks about the conspiracy of silence, about the Franklin cover-up, which we've talked about. Dennis Hastert, which we've talked about. So a lot of things, Jimmy Savile, which we've talked about. So just about everything in this article we have talked about at one time or another. Plus the Pizzagate stuff. Okay. All that aside, you've been with me now for about 3 years, almost 3 years doing this show.
Right.
You just heard that clip where she talked about how she had been repeatedly pregnant and the babies are taken away from her. And at times she is allowed to see the babies, but then the babies are retaken away from her. So out of everything that we've talked about on this show, what two things do you think that sounds most familiar?
Well, naturally, the alien abduction.
Bingo.
experience, where they're presented with the child later.
Bingo.
What would the second one be?
Static ritual abuse.
Oh, right.
Now, in satanic ritual abuse, usually what they say is that the claims that were made in the satanic panic in the 80s and then the 90s was they would say that these girls were impregnated by someone in their coven. And oftentimes these were the girls themselves that would say this kind of stuff. And they would say that the babies were taken away from them and were sacrificed, or they were given to other members of the coven. Now, in the satanic ritual abuse stuff, as far as I know, I don't see anything that says that they were ever shown the babies again, right? But, as you said, in the alien abduction lore, you do have people that under hypnosis have claimed that they were pregnant. The aliens took the babies, and at a later time they were re-abducted, and they were shown the babies so that the hybrids would have some kind of human contact with their mothers. Now contrast that with what we just played in the clip. It's very similar. It's like you could just take out a word here or there. Instead of sex traffickers, it's space aliens. Instead of space aliens, it's Satanists. See what I'm getting at here?
Yeah.
It's the same stuff. It's the same thing. And I'm not necessarily saying that all three phenomenon are the same, but I'm saying is that it's the phenomenon there is the fact that you're just taking one group and adding in that group, but the story stays the same.
Yeah, I was trying to imagine some sort of correlation. Obviously there isn't one, but I wonder if possibly that could be, I mean, obviously they're according to her description, they're using that as not necessarily a form of brainwashing, but a form of like punishment and reward system sort of a thing for her. And I wonder if that's because it's sort of a deep-seated fear maybe in women who have children, and that's why it's surfaced in other areas as well.
Yeah. And there's also things like fake pregnancies, that phenomenon that happens.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if she has been trafficked or not, but I'm going to really have to say that I'm like going to call BS on this story because of the similarities to these other two things. It's almost like she could have just picked up on that from watching things about alien abduction or reading things about Satan, about SRA, satanic ritual abuse. It's all very similar. It said, like I said, she's using the word child traffickers. Now, child trafficking does exist. We've talked about that many times. But this has become one of those kind of like cause celebs right now. And I think it's a good thing that there are Christian groups out there that are doing good work trying to prevent child trafficking. But we're starting to edge just a little bit, especially with the Pizzagate stuff, which I've gone on the record saying that I think there is something to it. But I think we're beginning to edge a little bit into mass hysteria here.
Yeah.
Okay. In the 80s, Geraldo Rivera had this big special, which you can still see this thing online.
I've watched it.
Geraldo had this big special, which he later came out and said it was all bullshit. Has later distanced himself from it and even said that none of it was really true. That it was just sensationalist television. Now, Dr. Phil goes on and he even comes out and he says that he had these experts and this team that corroborated her story. that checked it out and her story matches. Well, the only person we're hearing this from is Dr. Phil. Where's the evidence? Where's the proof?
Or one single name of all these high profile, clients. And
Yeah. Well, but he's going to say, well, we can't tell you. He does say, we can't tell you who these people are.
Right. But is anybody doing anything about it? That's my question.
Well, he's saying he can't tell you who these people are, but he's also saying, I can't tell you who my sources are. Well, if you can't tell me who the sources are, then we would not doubt that this, we can doubt that her story is even true. You see what I'm saying? And so here we are in 2017 with all the Pizzagate that came out after the election and all the focus on child trafficking. And then all of a sudden this girl comes on and she's telling very similar stories to all these other people, like in the kids in the McMartin preschool case, who said that they got taken down to underground chambers for which they could access by being flushed down. They could access by being flushed down the toilet, and that not only the workers at the daycare were down there in the satanic rituals, but Chuck Norris was down there with them too. And that and the McMartin concerned parents of the McMartin kids were on the Geraldo special. Now here we are in 2017, and Dr. Phil's like, well, I got to do something to top the Cash Me Outside girl, because she made him what he is. If it wasn't for me. And now he comes out with this that gets the biggest ratings of his show ever. We're starting to edge on hysteria here. And even though there is an actual real concern in my mind, it's like, let's not edge into this hysteria where all of a sudden everybody's a child sex trafficker. Where now it's not, we replaced the Satanists. We replaced Satanists with Muslims with child sex traffickers. Before that, it was aliens. If you want to go way back, it was the Jews killing Christian children to put their blood in matzo balls. Okay? So let's be careful. That's all I'm saying. These daytime TV shows that are going to try to get all these ratings. And I know somebody's going to sit there and just be like, oh my God, this is true. Can you believe this? It's these satanic child sex traffickers. This girl's story is horrible. But according to this girl, she was pregnant like 5 times a year or something like that.
Well, that math just doesn't work right there.
I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's the same. It's just the same stuff. I guess just another snapshot of the world circa 2017, I suppose. All right, guys. Next time we are going to have on the guy that y'all sent me so many good emails about when we talked about Pizzagate with him. And we're bringing back Thad McCracken. So I'm just going to sit back and let the guy go 100 miles an hour. And hopefully no F-bombs get dropped.
Well, at least not too many.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to thank you guys for listening. Rob, tell everybody where they can hear us and about Patreon one more time, and we'll close it out.
Yeah, you can check out everything on our website at www.conspirinormal.com. There's links to the show, links to our Patreon page. There's, if you want to support the show, we got a donate button on there for one-time donations, or our Patreon account, which we just recorded episode number 4 today. You can head over to Patreon, and that's patreon.com/conspirinormal.
Yeah, you'll get to hear the adventures of young Peter Robbins.
Part 1. Part 2 is
Part 1.
upcoming, and it will be epic.
And it shall be epic. And Dr. Phil listens to Conspirinormal, and so should you. And Luke, take us out. Oh, yeah, Luke's not here. All right, guys. We'll catch you next week on Conspirinormal.
I miss Luke.